Hi guys, how are you? I am so happy to be in a webinar. You guys know I love webinar. Tell me where you're from. I already see Michael, who I'm excited to see. Sophia, who I just saw. Great. Hi, Sherry. Let me know what else I've got here before we start on Alexander Hamilton. You'll have that song in your mind after this. Anybody else? Hi, Tony. Okay. And Sophia, we know is Shanghai. Hi, Jerry. Hi, Andy. I was wondering who 6 a.m., 6 o'clock morning was. Hi, Andy. Andy, where are you from? Oh, great. In Canada. Okay. Hi, Sherry in Shanghai. Okay, wonderful. Let's go ahead and get started. I know some of you guys have big tests this week. Some of you just finished big tests. So let's take a little brain break and just have fun and listen to what's going on with Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was not a president of the United States ever, okay? But he was a founding father. He actually helped develop lots of things, including, probably most importantly, the way we use money, our money system. They call that a financial system. Okay, let me show you um, the book first. Okay, kind of cool. And then I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint like I normally do. And I've got some neat videos for you. So you might go, oh, this looks kind of boring, or okay, history. It's a little bit of history today, guys, but a little bit more of theater and singing. You'll find out why I say that in a minute. Okay, Alexander Hamilton was one of the founding fathers of the United States of America. Even though he had a difficult childhood, he became a Revolutionary War hero, an important politician, and the founder of the country's financial system. So, like I just said, he helped develop our money system. He was a politician, meaning he was a person that was in government. And he was a Revolutionary War hero. He helped battle against the English in the Revolutionary War. Hamilton never ran for president, but his ideas helped shape the new nation. He pushed for having a strong federal government. He set up a banking system, remember we talked about money, that helped the young country survive. Many of his ideas are still used today. And I have got the $10 bill here. He is on our $10 bill. Okay. All right. A challenging childhood. Hamilton he wasn't born in the United States. He was born on January 11th, so just a few days ago would have been his birthday, on Nevis, a Caribbean island in the British West Indies. So in the Caribbean Sea, okay? The exact year of his birth is unknown. Hamilton had two sets of birth records. One said he was born in 1755, and the other said he was born in 1757, which is the date Hamilton used. Here's a museum of where he used to live, of history. Back then, Nevis was a colony of Great Britain. About 1,000 British colonists lived there. They grew sugar and sent ships to trade to far off places. Okay, and a colony is a land ruled by another country. The people who lived there, called colonists, are subject to the ruling country. For example, we had the colonies here in the 13 colonies in America that were sent over by England, right? And then we had the Revolutionary War. Hamilton's life was hard. His family was very poor. Also, his parents were never able to marry. His mother, Rachel, had married at age 16, but her husband treated her badly, so she left him. Then she met Hamilton's father, James. They had two children, Alexander and his older brother, James Jr. In 1765, the family moved to St. Croix. I've been to the island right next to St. Croix, and see how it's spelled with an X on the end, but it's pronounced Croix, like Troy. Very beautiful here. It's very, very warm all year round. Soon after Hamilton's father left and never returned. To make money, Hamilton began working for the traders who brought goods for her to sell. To make money, his mother opened a small store. Hamilton began working for the traders who brought goods for her to sell. But 2 years later, his mother died. Hamilton and James Jr. went to live with a cousin and then with an uncle. Within 2 years, both the cousin and the uncle died. Now the brothers, just young teens, were all alone. So it was almost like he was an orphan. Oops. In his time, Hamilton grew up in the West Indies in the 1700s. So it says back then, some children attended school in churches. Children from wealthy families were sent to Europe and Canada or the American colonies to complete their education. They didn't stay there on the island. They traded sugar, they called it white gold, and slavery was the biggest business they had. Today, most money in the region comes from tourism. So, like I said, I've been to St. Croix, to St. Croix, not the exact island, but lots of tourism here because it's a beautiful place to go. So that's what they even had back then. But today, a lot of people don't grow sugar there. They just use tourists for money. Children did many chores to help their families, but when they had free time, they played with homemade toys like jump ropes and corn husk dolls. See this little doll they made out of a corn husk, a corn plant? The islands of the West Indies were colonies held by several European countries. Today, most are independent nations like Cuba. Clothing as babies, both boys and girls wore white dresses. But by the age 3, children started dressing like little adults. Girls wore tight, stiff dresses and boys wore suits. Let's do one more page before I show you a few things. Coming to America, it's a beautiful ship. Hamilton faced many hardships. That means difficulties. But instead of giving up, he worked hard to improve his life. After their uncle's death, James Jr. got a job with a carpenter. That's a person who builds things. And Hamilton kept working as a clerk, meaning helping to sell things. As part of his job, Hamilton ordered supplies. He handled money. He also charted courses for the ships that carried the company's supplies. Older businessmen were impressed with his skills. One of them even invited Hamilton to live with his family. Okay, so now he's going to go to New York in America. Let me do this and then I'll show you a little bit about his life. Another person Hamilton impressed was a minister named Hugh Knox. Hamilton wrote poems and published them in the local newspaper. Knox noticed his poems and encouraged him to write more. One day, Hamilton wrote a letter about a recent hurricane. That's a big storm like a typhoon. He showed the letter to Knox, and Knox told Hamilton to publish it, meaning to put it in a book. People were amazed that a teenager could write so well. Local businessmen decided to send Hamilton to the American colonies to get a proper education. So in October 1772, Hamilton boarded a ship and he sailed off to begin a better life. So he goes from here down in the Caribbean all the way up here. Okay. So far, would you agree that he kind of had a bad life being an orphan? He had to work. His uncle died, his cousin died. He's with his brother. Tell me in the chat, yes or no. Do you think that's a very difficult life so far as a child? It's probably very hot where he lives. Yeah, Tony says, yeah, very much so. All right, let me show you what he looked like as an adult. Okay, so here's Alexander Hamilton, and here is money, like I told you, that he's on. Okay, this is him. And he's also he learned in the United States, and then he became a Revolutionary War hero. And that's what the book said at the very beginning. So America's 13 colonies fought the Revolutionary War against the British, against England. He kind of headed that. All right. Our book also said he was born in 1755 on this island in the Caribbean Sea. And then he came to America later. And remember, there were conflicting dates about when he was born. So he did come to America later. So this is where he lived in the Caribbean. Okay, you guys can see Mexico over here. Here's South America down here. So here's a big map, okay, of North America. It's right in the middle there. Very beautiful. Let me show you a little bit about his life, and then we'll go back to something else. All righty. All right, let me share this. Okay, you guys can see this screen? Oops, it timed out. I had it ready before class and it timed out. Let me get it. And you can see that Moby, who's the crazy robot in here, was actually going to look at a poster
Hamilton
of
the
a
musical
play.
is going. So many questions.
Remember that there's a picture here. I'm going to show you this play in a second. It's something they acted on Broadway. It was the biggest play in the United States for a long time. So Moby's dancing because he's thinking about the musical, the play Hamilton. He's not really thinking about the founding father, but you can see that Tim's got him on his shirt there.
Hamilton the musical is going on the road. Apply now to be a backup dancer. Dear Tim and Moby, can you do a movie on Alexander Hamilton? From Nico. A sure thing, Nico. There's a lot of love for Alexander Hamilton these days. Until recently, he was sort of like the forgotten founding father. Maybe because he was never president. Or maybe because he never wore a cool hat like this guy. But it's still fitting that Hamilton's face would wind up on some money. His ideas laid the foundation for the U.S. Treasury Department. That's the agency that handles America's finances. It collects our taxes, takes out loans, pays the country's bills, and prints our money. Hamilton served as the first Secretary of the Treasury, the head of the department. He strengthened America's economy and shaped it for centuries to come. And, in the process, he rescued our fragile democracy. Well, after the American Revolution, the country was in kind of a weird place. Against all odds, the United States had defeated the biggest empire in the world. But in reality, there was very little that united the 13 former colonies. The states each had their own culture and laws. Each could coin its own money, form its own armies, even make its own treaties. The only thing that legally tied them together was the Articles of Confederation. That was America's first constitution, drafted in 1776. The Articles let the colonies coordinate just enough to win the war, but it wasn't nearly up to the task of building a nation. To Alexander Hamilton, that was obvious long before the war's end. At just 22 years old, he was serving as an assistant to George Washington, drafting letters, delivering orders, meeting.
So remember, he left the Caribbean island. He learned things in the United States. He became a war hero. And after that, he helped George Washington, who was the first president. And then he started to develop our financial system, our money.
With diplomats, whatever the general needed. In that role, Hamilton was present at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, in the winter of 1778. He watched helplessly as troops died of starvation, cold, and disease. Soldiers did get paid in Continentals, the money printed by the Articles Congress, but farmers and merchants wouldn't accept the currency. Everyone knew the Articles government had no power to collect taxes, so nobody trusted its dollars. For Hamilton, the lesson was simple. A government with worthless money wasn't worth much itself. After the war, he settled in New York and built a successful law firm. In his spare time, he studied economics and political philosophy, wrote essays and articles arguing for a stronger government, and served in the state legislature. Yeah, he had an insane work ethic. That's what had gotten him so far. Hamilton was born dirt poor on the Caribbean island of Nevis. His mother's death left him an orphan at age 13. But he saw to his own education and developed into a gifted writer. Local leaders were so impressed they paid for him to go to college on the mainland. I know, think about that. A 17-year-old kid lands in New York, and within a few years, he's at the center of the revolution. A little after that, he's running a law firm and serving as a legislator. But as Hamilton's star was rising, the new nation was on the brink of failure. Since the war, the government had sunk even further into debt.
Remember, he helped them. He said, I'm a lawyer, but I'm going to start helping our country get back on its feet and make sure that our dollar, our money is actually worth something because no one really wanted to accept it.
Riots broke out as soldiers who'd served in the revolution went unpaid. And British troops were building forts on American soil. Hamilton sensed that the time was right for a new direction. Writing letters to leaders around the country, he called for a meeting to strengthen the Articles of Confederation. Today, it's known as the Constitutional Convention. Hamilton was one of 3 delegates from the state of New York. Within a few months, there was a draft for a new constitution based on the principle of federalism. States would have to share power with a strong national government.
Okay, so he made our money actually worth something. And today, our money in America is backed by gold. So if I have a $10 bill, I've got Alexander Hamilton on it actually, I know that this is actually worth something. So he came in and kind of set up our whole banking system. Okay, and the reason at the beginning of the video that I showed you that Moby is dancing, the robot, is because he wants to make sure that he can get a part in the new play Hamilton, which I'm going to show you in just a second. Okay. Let me go back to this, to our book. Okay, and show you him in the Revolutionary War. And I'm going to show you another really cool video and all the singing that Moby and the robot's talking about. Okay, revolutionary change. When Hamilton was in college, the American colonies were on the brink of war with Great Britain. That's England, right? Politics quickly became Hamilton's new passion. That means he's very excited about it. He spoke at rallies, he published papers supporting the American fight. Hamilton never finished college. After the Revolutionary War began in April of 1775, he joined a militia. He fought in battles and studied military plans. In early 1776, he became a captain in the New York State Army. A militia is a group of citizens organized for military service. Okay, so they're all going to go against King George. King George looks like this. And this is some of the Broadway show that they're talking about with Moby. This is a person that's playing King George. Let me pull it up. And here you go. This is kind of funny. They make this guy in the play, and I've actually seen the play on Broadway. And he says, "Oh, America, just you wait. You're going to die by England," but it's kind of a funny little part. So this is the guy that plays King George, who the Americans are against.
You say the price of my love's not a price that you're willing to pay. You cry in your tea, which you heard in the sea when you see me go by. Why so sad? Remember we made an arrangement when you went away. Now you're making me mad. Remember, despite our estrangement, I'm your man. You'll be back soon, you see. You remember you belong to me. You'll be back, time will tell. You remember that I served you well. Oceans rise, empires fall.
He's saying that America, you'll be back. You'll be sorry that you went to war with us.
And when push comes to shove, I will send a fully armed battalion to remind you of my love. Da 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 yada da 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 yada da 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 yada da 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 da. You say our love is draining and you can't go.
Okay, so he's saying, you'll be back, America. You'll be sorry that you went to war. That's part of the Broadway show. Let me show you another beginning of the Broadway show. Hamilton on Broadway had all actors and actresses who were either African American, they were different minorities, very few white Caucasian people. That was some of its charm, that the guy, Manuel Noriega, that made the Broadway show, kind of made it to be that way, because it was mostly white people that were our forefathers. Kind of a cute show. Let me show you Hamilton. Okay, this is the beginning of the show. Let me show you here. I want to make sure I get the right thing. I've got a couple clips to show you. Okay. This is the beginning of the show. And they're talking about Alexander Hamilton. He's not yet a founding father. He's just kind of a guy working at a law practice.
Word got around, they said this kid is insane, man. Took up a collection just to send him to the mainland. Get your education, don't forget from whence you came. And the world's gonna know your name. What's your name, man? Alexander Hamilton. My name is Alexander Hamilton. And there's a million things I haven't done. Just you wait, just you.
Okay, this is the guy that actually wrote the play. He wrote all the songs. Very, very cool. So he plays him in the Broadway show.
When he was 10, his father split, full of it, debt-ridden. 2 years later, see Alex and his mother bedridden, half dead, sitting in
This is his wife.
their own sick, the scientific, and Alex got better, but his mother went quack.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, so I wanted to show you some of the clip of that. And Disney is the one that actually kind of puts it on very big. Let's go to our book and I'll show you some more clips about Alexander Hamilton in just a second. Kind of neat. Okay, we did this page. So remember, he's in the Revolutionary War. He helps America defeat England. Okay. Hamilton was a fearless soldier, but he was an even better manager. That's kind of like a boss. It helps people, organizes people. He was organized and knew how to get the supplies his soldiers needed. George Washington, who was commander of the Continental Army, he's not president yet, notice this. So in 1777, he asked Hamilton to join the Continental Army as his assistant. Hamilton helped Washington plan battles and manage staff. He also wrote important letters. Many of those letters went to the Continental Congress asking for food and other supplies. Here's Alexander Hamilton. Here's George Washington. While the troops fought for freedom, the Congress tried to figure out how to run the new country. Remember the Brainpot video just showed us that there was all these states and they really didn't know what to do. As Washington's assistant, Hamilton watched the Congress struggle. Too many members were fighting for the rights of individual states. Hamilton thought the United States needed a strong federal government too. He feared the nation would never succeed unless all the states came together in a union. After 4 years on Washington's staff, Hamilton quit. He wanted to return to the battlefield. In 1781, his troops helped the Continental Army with the Battle of Yorktown, which is right by where I live, actually, in Virginia. During the war, Hamilton met and married Elizabeth Schuyler. That was the woman you just saw in the Broadway show. After Yorktown, he retired from the military and joined her in Albany, New York. Their son Philip was born soon after. Philip was the first of 8 children. He had 8 children. Not one to sit still, Hamilton began to study law. For 6 months, he studied a friend's law books. Then he took and passed the bar exam. That's an exam you take to become a lawyer. To Hamilton, becoming a lawyer wasn't just a job. It was the quickest way to get into politics. Many members of Congress were lawyers. In 1782, the Hamilton family moved to New York City. Hamilton became a federal tax collector, so he collected money from people. His job was difficult. Many New Yorkers didn't want to pay taxes to the federal government. They wanted to keep money in their own state. Hamilton knew this was a problem. The war was costing the country a lot of money. Some states paid their share, but others didn't. The federal government had to borrow money to pay the war debts. That means what they owed. That year, Hamilton was chosen to serve in the Continental Congress. He explained the problem to delegates from the states, but they wanted to keep tax money in their states too. Here he is going before the Congress and George Washington. Hamilton argued that the answer to this problem was to rewrite the Articles of Confederation. That was America's first constitution. He thought the document was weak. It gave too much power to the states and not enough to the one federal government. After the war ended in 1783, more people began to listen. At the Constitutional Convention in 1787, Hamilton and other delegates didn't like it. So Hamilton and the 2 other leaders wrote essays explaining what it was and why it was needed. They convinced delegates to sign the new Constitution. Okay, so this is how the new American Constitution comes into being. Okay, we get a new nation because we defeat England and we get a brand new Constitution. Right? Let me show you a little bit more about Alexander Hamilton. Whoops, there we go. All right. Okay, so here's Hamilton on Broadway, the person I just showed you. Okay, this is the one that played Hamilton. He's in a different outfit there on his show. This started a couple years ago, and it is the biggest show probably ever in America. He never finished college like our book said, but instead he went to become captain of New York's Army. He was asked by George Washington to be his right-hand man. That means your best friend, your best soldier, your best person. He became his assistant throughout the whole Revolutionary War against England. Okay, so here he is, and here's George Washington. He married and later studied to become a lawyer. Many lawyers became politicians, so that's what he wanted to be. He became a federal tax collector. He collected money from people to be used by the government. And he was a Secretary of Treasury with George Washington as president in the United States. Okay. All right, let me show you one other thing about him. Part of our Alexander Hamilton. This is about who people think Alexander Hamilton is. They ask people on the street, who do you think Alexander Hamilton is? And this is after the show is out. Okay.
Thing that comes to mind is the hit Broadway musical. But what about the man himself? The New York Public Library has one-of-a-kind artifacts from the nation's founding father. CBS 2's Magdalena Doris takes a look.
He's as hot as can be right now, taking over the spotlight, and he's been dead for over 200 years.
He was one of our founding fathers who got a lot farther by working a lot harder, by being a lot smarter, and by being a self-starter, and by 14.
This guy's repeating lines from the Broadway show I just showed you.
He was placed in charge of a trading charter.
Who is Alexander Hamilton?
We don't know. He went to King's College, which is now Columbia College.
More than just the face on the $10 bill or the subject of an 11-time Tony-winning musical, the New York Public Library is uncovering the man behind all the hype in Alexander Hamilton, striver, statesman, and scoundrel. Inside the library adjacent to Bryant Park, we got a look at the new exhibit, documents from the founding father's life, some in his own handwriting, uncover our nation's first Secretary of Treasury. He made his way from orphan in the West Indies to American military hero.
He showed so much promise that people on the island took up a collection and sent him to America.
In his own words, published for the world to see, he confesses his shortcomings.
We also have him admitting to an affair in a very public way.
Pride ultimately took Hamilton's life 2 days after dueling with Aaron Burr, a political rival.
Okay, this is the end of the book. So spoiler alert, everybody. He got in a duel. A duel is when you have a gun and the other person has a gun, and you see who shoots first. So he actually got killed.
He died from a gunshot wound.
I think there could have been an easy way out of it, but he decided that he needed to defend his honor.
Want to learn more? The exhibit is free and open to the public from.
So pretty neat to have his writings there. That's pretty interesting. A duel because they were challenging each other. They were they were enemies throughout most of their life. Let me show you some of the Broadway show, and you'll say, oh, they were actually kind of friends at the beginning. This is let me show you this. This is what they look like. It's on my PowerPoint, but since they gave away the ending of the book, we'll still read it. But he died in a duel. They both have their own guns, and you have your back against the other person's back, and you walk, 10 steps, and then you turn around and you shoot. And so it's a very scary way to end an argument, isn't it? But that's Alexander Hamilton, and that's Aaron Burr. Okay, he was another lawyer in New York. All right, let me show you this. Oops. Let me pull this up. Let me go back a minute. Right before he is in a duel. This is when he's talking to his friends from the show. Remember, he's a lawyer. He's not a founding father, and all his friends are dancing in the show saying, you could probably be bigger and better than you thought. You could run the Treasury and start our banking system.
When Lin-Manuel Miranda sings about the drive of the young, scrappy, and hungry immigrant, he's not singing about just any immigrant.
I am the ALEXANDER. we are meant to be.
Remember, this is the guy that actually made the Broadway show. So they interview him for a minute. I'm going to let you hear that.
Colony that runs independently. Meanwhile, Britain keeps on us endlessly.
He's singing about the man on the $10 bill, Alexander Hamilton, the revolutionary, visionary, and youngest of the founding fathers.
This is a guy who, on the strength of his writing, pulled himself from poverty into the revolution that helped create our nation and caught beef with every other founding father. I mean, there's great drama, there's a great love story, there's incredible political intrigue.
Corruption's such an old song that we can sing along in harmony, and nowhere is it stronger than in Albany. There's colonies, economies.
In other words, a life made for the stage.
Practice the law, practically perfected it. I've seen injustice in the world and I've corrected it.
Hamilton, written by and starring Miranda, is a smash off-Broadway at New York's Public Theater and is heading to Broadway this summer.
Talk less.
What?
Smile more. Don't let them know what you're against or what you're for.
It's Hamilton's life and death at the hand of Vice President Aaron Burr, put to music that's as energetic as the man and the times
And that's supposed to be Aaron Burr, who we just talked about he had a duel with.
he lived through.
We take it as a given that hip-hop music is the music of the revolution.
The bullets out your gun. The bullets out your gun. We move undercover and we move as one. Through the night we have one shot to live another day. We cannot let a stray gunshot give us away.
Hamilton's unlikely journey to the stage began 6 years ago when Miranda.
Okay, that's the person that plays his wife. I'll show you her in just a second. So basically, this whole musical is about Alexander Hamilton coming from the Caribbean Sea to America to learn. He learns and actually just starts reading law books. He doesn't study law and he becomes a lawyer and a politician. And he's kind of the right-hand man for George Washington and throughout the war against England, and kind of becomes a neat guy. He ends up later in his life going back to France and studying over there. He's always working. And like we talked about, he does end up dying in a duel with another person. The duel is when you have a gun and the other person has a gun. Okay, to see who's more honorable and doesn't shoot first. And he got shot first. Okay, let me show you one little thing, and we're going to go back to our book. I want to make sure I have enough time to show you. Let's see. This is one little thing about Alexander Hamilton. Some interesting facts. Then we'll go back to our book and the Broadway show.
Invented the United States of America. George Washington was the guiding star, Thomas Jefferson the visionary, Benjamin Franklin the sage. But Hamilton was the pragmatist, the man who got it done. This most self-made of self-made men took a country with no past and planned its future. He was born on January 11th, 1755, on the island of Nevis. This was not the Caribbean of your cruise fantasy, quite the contrary. As Ron Chernow writes in his biography of Hamilton, while other founding fathers were reared in tidy New England villages or cosseted on baronial Virginia estates, Hamilton grew up in a tropical hellhole. Sugar plantations, slave auctions were a regular feature of island life.
They're saying that where he grew up was very dirty, it was hot, bugs were everywhere compared to all the other founding fathers that kind of were schooled in England or learned from the best people in America. Slaves were there. They had a sugar plantation, which you're growing sugar and you're farming all the time, every day.
The spectacle, buyers swinging branding irons as they surveyed the human merchandise, made a permanent impression on Hamilton. He was a fierce abolitionist his entire life.
So he did not like slavery at all.
At an early age, his mother died of yellow fever when he was 14, leaving the teenage boy destitute. A local judge had to buy him shoes so that he could attend her funeral. He soon took a job as a clerk for a local merchant. Before long, he was running the business, coordinating shipments of mules and codfish, calculating currency exchanges, and advising
doing a lot of work that even a young person can't do, okay? Calculating lots of things, dealing with money.
Apprenticeship in trade, credit, and commerce. In 1773, he arrived in New York to attend King's College, the forerunner of today's Columbia University. Swept up in the revolutionary fervor of his adopted country, he dropped out to join the Continental Army. He quickly came to the attention of George Washington, who made him a staff officer. The sonless Washington called the fatherless Hamilton "my boy." Fellow officers later remembered, "Call Colonel Hamilton," as Washington's instinctive utterance when important news arrived. As Washington's trusted aide, he was involved in every aspect of running the war, including actual fighting where he distinguished himself on multiple.
So he fought in the war. He did all the important stuff for George Washington against England.
Decisive Continental Congress that shaped his political views. The problem with Congress, in Hamilton's view, was that too few members took the idea of nationhood seriously. They quarreled over their narrow interests rather than uniting over the national interests. As the war was winding down, Hamilton laid out the choice before the country in a widely read 6-part essay. "We could become a noble and magnificent federal republic," he wrote.
So what he's saying is, hey, states, you 13 states, stop fighting about your own, states and what you want to do. We're going to make a whole nation.
Closely linked in the pursuit of a common interest. Or we could stumble ahead as a number of petty states with the appearance only of union. It was clear where Hamilton stood. The speed by which the United States became a...
Okay, so he said, stop quarreling about your own state and let's become a nation. And that's what he did. That was very important. Let me go back to our book. I'm going to show you something else from the Broadway show Hamilton, and one other little thing. Let me go back. Okay, you remember a debt is something, it's money that you owe. So he's talking about the nation's debt. In 1789, George Washington became the first U.S. president. Washington wanted to work with people he could trust. He asked Hamilton to be his Secretary of Treasury. Treasury means money. Hamilton started by dealing with America's war debts. To do that, he combined the federal debt with the remaining state debts. Then he used the federal money to begin paying off the total debt. Hamilton also created the first bank of the United States. The bank held the government's money. It also printed paper money. Didn't have his face on it yet. Hamilton served as Secretary of the Treasury until 1795. Washington left office 2 years later. Many people in the government neither liked nor trusted Hamilton. They were happy Hamilton was no longer in office because George Washington left. But soon these people needed Hamilton. It seemed likely that America would go to war with France. Washington was asked to lead the troops. He agreed, but only if Hamilton was second in command. Hamilton was excited to lead troops into battle, but he never got the chance. In late 1800, the United States and France signed a peace agreement. Okay, so that's pretty neat that they never got to do that war. And I think that, George Washington, who had been president, said, I'm in charge of the war effort. I'm going to go back to war, and Hamilton has to be with me. That's pretty interesting. Very successful person. Let me show you him and his wife. Actually, this is another little clip. This is them having a party when he's getting ready to meet his wife. And these are all people from the army. And of course, yes, somebody said that it sounds like they're rapping. Rapping is a type of song where you're talking like this and you're kind of making rhymes.
Now everyone give it up for the maid of honor, Angelica Schuyler!
This is when they got married, when Alexander Hamilton got married.
A toast to the groom, to the groom, to the groom, to the groom, to the bride, to the bride, to the bride. From your sister, Angelica, who's always by your side, to your union,
to the revolution,
and the hope that you provide. May always be satisfied.
This is Alexander Hamilton's sister-in-law, his wife's sister, and she kind of likes Alexander Hamilton.
I remember that night, I just might regret that night for the rest of my days.
Ladies and gentlemen.
And it stopped. It's going to go forward in a second, but I want to show you that little part of them dancing and one other little dance. And we're going to take questions here in just a second. Let me show you a couple of the songs that I thought were pretty neat from this. And I'm going to show you interesting facts about Alexander Hamilton. Kind of a long name, isn't it?
Hamilton songs.
Now Hamilton's skill with the quill is undeniable, but what do we have in common? We're reliable with the ladies.
For this list, we'll be looking at the best songs from an incredible score written by Lin-Manuel Miranda. Yes, they're all the best. We will never be satisfied. Number 20, Alexander Hamilton.
How does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by Providence,
Talking about how he came from the Caribbean and learned.
impoverished and squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar.
The song that started it all. When Lin-Manuel Miranda performed the song at the White House in front of President Obama, nobody had any idea of the kind of success Hamilton would have.
Get your education, don't forget from whence you came, and the world's gonna know your name. What's your name, man? Alexander Hamilton.
Miranda began working on this song and a few others as part of a Hamilton mixtape.
When he started working on this after he read this book, it took him about 5 years to make all of these songs. Isn't that wild? I mean, he's just got so much talent, and he brought so many talented people with him to be in that show. Let me give you some top 10 fascinating facts about him. Since we finished our book and you know that he died in a duel, and they'll show this here, not him, the actual footage, obviously, but they talk about it. Okay, so top 10 facts about Alexander Hamilton. Remember, he wasn't a president. He just helped George Washington and then developed our country's money system.
Fascinating facts about Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton came from humble beginnings, but eventually became one of the founding fathers of the United States and the first Secretary of the Treasury. While he never became president, he was an incredibly influential figure in the formation of America and an indelible part of its history. In the video today, we've got 10 facts about him that you might not know. Number 10. He lied about his age. When Alexander Hamilton's mother, Rachel Fawcett, was a teenager, she was living on the island of Nevis in the British West Indies, and she was forced to marry a much older man named John Levine. Rachel, who was a descendant of British and French Huguenot parents, wasn't happy in the marriage. Levine was abusive and spent all the money that Rachel had inherited from her father's death. Eventually, Levine had her locked up in prison for adultery. After getting out of prison, Rachel didn't go back to her husband and the son they had together. Instead, she fled to St. Kitts, where she lived with a Scottish trader named James Hamilton. Rachel gave birth to a son in 1753, and then Alexander Hamilton was born on January the 11th, 1755, even though he told people he was born in 1757. Why Hamilton lied about his age stems from the fact that his father abandoned him, his brother, and their mother shortly after he was born. This left the family in poverty while living in St. Croix, and when Hamilton was 13, his mother died. Now having to support himself, Hamilton needed to find an apprenticeship. He thought that if he was 11, he would make a more desirable apprentice. Luckily for him,
He lied about his age because he wanted to get a job because he didn't have a parent anymore.
it worked, and he got a job as a clerk. Number 9. He came to America because he was a good writer. In August 1772, when Hamilton was 17, but telling people he was 15, the West Indies was hit by a horrible hurricane. Hamilton, who was working as a clerk, wrote about the hurricane in a letter.
Remember our book said he wrote about the hurricane, like a typhoon, and people noticed how well he wrote, so they sent him to America to go to school.
That he planned on sending to his father. However, first he showed it to a Presbyterian minister named Hugh Knox, who was also mentoring him. As an interesting side note here, Knox was ordained as a minister by Aaron Burr Sr., the father of Vice President Aaron Burr. As you might know,
Remember Aaron Burr was the one that shot him and killed him?
Studied American history, Aaron Burr is going to be a big part of this list. But let's get back to the letter. Knox read it and was impressed with Hamilton's writing. He encouraged Hamilton to publish it in a newspaper where Knox filled in as an editor. It was printed in October along with a foreword by Knox. After the letter was published,
He got the letter published and people took note of how well that he wrote, and that's when they sent him to America to go to school.
Sent into America to be educated. Several months later, Hamilton was sent to New York, where he enrolled in King's College, which is now called Columbia. Now, many of you are probably aware that there is a musical about Hamilton, aptly named Hamilton. The musical is told entirely in rap, and it features all minority actors. The creator of the play, Lin-Manuel Miranda, said that Hamilton's letter inspired the play. In an interview with Vogue, he stated, "It's the fact that Hamilton wrote his way off the islands where he grew up. That's the hip-hop narrative." Also, by immigrating to New York, it makes Hamilton the only key founding father who wasn't born in the States. Number 8.
So he passed his exam, his bar exam, without even really going to college for law. That's just crazy. That's wild. Very smart. Okay, I'm going to stop it there to make sure we have enough time for questions. I want to show you one more little blip from the Broadway show, and then we'll go to questions about Alexander Hamilton. Pretty neat.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 10 things you need to know. Number 1. We rode across the Hudson at dawn. My friend William P. Van Ness signed on as my number 2. Hamilton arrived with his crew.
That's George Washington, by the way. The guy that's walking right here, that's supposed to be George Washington rapping about how great Alexander Hamilton is.
Nathaniel Pendleton and the doctor that he knew. Number 3. I watched Hamilton examine the terrain. I wish I could tell you what was happening in his brain.
By the way, now they're dancing, and I'll just show you another couple seconds of this. This is Aaron Burr, this other guy. Aaron Burr was the one that shot him with the gun.
This man is poisoned by political pursuits. Most disputes die and no one shoots. Number 4. Hamilton drew first position, looking to the world like a man on a mission. This is a soldier with a marksman's ability. The doctor turned around so he could have deniability. 5. Now I didn't know this at the time, but we were near the same spot. My son died, is that why? 6. He examined his gun with such rigor. I watched as he methodically fiddled with the trigger.